Coming out of Indianapolis, you're looking at Cam Ward and then a gap. All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for March the 4th. The Combine is in the rearview mirror. We are less than a week from the legal tampering period opening up, 8 days away from the new league year. And that means we're going to have a lot of action over the next week or so. And one thing that's going to come down today on Tuesday is the deadline for franchise tags. My expectation right now would be that the Minnesota Vikings will not use the franchise tag on anyone. That means Sam Darnold would have a freeway to free agency and would have a chance to test his value on the market. And I get the next question, of course, is why wouldn't they tag him? $40 million, it would give them a chance to create an insurance policy for themselves going into 2025. And I think there are a couple of reasons for it. Number one, I think the tag would probably make it more difficult, not less difficult, to get a deal done. That number, $40 million, unless you're willing to give Sam Darnold a contract at $45 million per year with a guarantee approaching $100 million, it'd be really hard to find common ground. And so if you aren't willing to go to that number, or that number is above where you value the player, then you're either saying we're either going to overpay him or we're just going to have that lump sum on our books for this year. And there was some merit to the idea of doing that. But I think ultimately they come to the decision that they value him a certain way, and allowing him to go to the market, and maybe he gets a Baker Mayfield type of deal, which, by the way, is significantly less than where the franchise tag is. And then they hope that he'll come back to them with whatever offer he has and maybe be willing to work something out. So that's number one. Then number two, if you tag him with the intention of trading him or wanting to trade him, it's really tough to count on doing that unless you have a deal worked out ahead of time. And based on some of the conditions of the market right now, I think it would be difficult for the Vikings to work out a deal where you would trade Sam Darnold on the franchise tag, and then another team is willing to go to those higher numbers, the $45 or $50 million a year range, to get him signed long-term. You'd be talking about another team then giving up an asset plus a huge contract to get Sam Darnold in, when they know that it's less likely that they tag him. Then it, like you look at it, if you're the other team, it's like, yeah, we'll just sit and wait. And they probably aren't going to tag him, and Sam will make it to the market. So that's why they are where they are. Now, does this mean Sam Darnold is done with the Vikings? I do not think so. I think you have to look at the landscape here and where the Vikings are and where Sam Darnold is. I think the Vikings would love to have Sam Darnold back in 2025 and give themselves some insurance at that position. I think, if you're Sam, you look at it and say, like, yes, I want to go to a place where I can be the next quarterback for the next 5 or 10 years. And if that opportunity exists, then great. But if it doesn't, the Minnesota Vikings are a good place, a good environment for a quarterback to be in, a good team to play with Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison, and Christian Darrisaw coming back to solidify that offensive line. And they've got some money to play with to maybe shore up the interior of that offensive line. And they've got a good defense coming back. So for Sam, that makes some sense. And then for the Vikings, I think you look at this, and a lot of it for me is where your team is. They like a lot of things that J.J. McCarthy brings to the table. J.J. did enough over the summer to push Sam and to really make it a discussion point before he got hurt there in August. And wasn't really part of the plan ahead of time, but he had done enough to really make them ask the question whether or not it would be right to play McCarthy at some point over the course of the year. That said, he did go through 2 knee surgeries. Now, the second one was just a cleanup. It wasn't the full-on repair they went through the last time, but they did go through a cleanup surgery. And J.J. McCarthy did lose some weight. So, I think some of the question, if you're the Vikings, is, do we know what we're getting with J.J. McCarthy right now, or are we projecting? Is he going to be able to get back to his fighting weight in time for OTAs, in time for training camp? Are we going to be able to put him out there and, and have him in position to give the other veterans on the team the sort of product at the position that they got last year? And that's an open question as well. And that's a tough one to answer because, again, he lost 4 months of development time. He did lose some weight. That's, again, a question you've got to ask if you're the Vikings, because this is a team that won 14 games last year. This isn't a rebuilding team where you can say, okay, like we're going to, sink some time into his development this year and we're going to ride out the bumps and if, like he does feel the effects of having lost all that development time, having lost that weight, well, that's okay. No, like this is a team with a lot of accomplished veterans: Justin Jefferson, Christian Darrisaw, Jonathan, Grenard on the other side of the ball, Andrew Van Ginkel, Dallas Turner going into year 2. We'll see if Harrison Smith's back. Like there's a lot of good veteran players that, are looking for you to give them the best answer possible at that position. And that's why you try to get Sam Darnold back, because that gives you some certainty at the position. And if it's not Sam, I'd expect there to be somebody else in there. Maybe it's Daniel Jones coming back, where you do have a solid insurance policy. So again, like they really love JJ McCarthy in a lot of different ways. He traveled with them starting in October, so he was around a bunch, and he did get to do some of the non-physical learning. But coming back off the surgery, like there are those boxes that you have to check, and that's not JJ's fault. Like that's just part of the process of getting back there. And what I think the Vikings feel like they've got to give their team at the quarterback position. All right. Second topic for this week, the top of the draft. And I do think there has been a little separation at quarterback. And I think if you talk to most teams, you'd say the top 2 players in this draft are Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter. Obviously, quarterback's almost a separate category with the way the position's valued in the NFL. And so, okay, like where are the quarterbacks now? I think coming out of Indianapolis, you're looking at a Cam Ward and then a gap. Here's the reason why. In today's NFL, and particularly if you're an AFC team, you have to chase ceiling. And if you're an AFC team and you're Tennessee draft picking 1 or you're Cleveland picking 2, you're looking up at that mountain. And what's at the top of that mountain? It's Patrick Mahomes, it's Josh Allen, it's Joe Burrow, it's Lamar Jackson. Then if you go a little bit down the mountain, what do you have? You have CJ Stroud, you have Trevor Lawrence, you have Justin Herbert. Maybe you have Drake May, maybe you have Bo Nix. Like you're going to have to you have to win consecutive games in the playoffs against quarterbacks like that if you're in the AFC. And so I think Cam Ward's the guy that you can chase that with. He's the guy you can chase ceiling with because he does some things that can't be taught. And the question with him is going to be consistency. It was very inconsistent at Washington State. It became more consistent at Miami. He had a better team around him. So you are projecting with Cam Ward after his 5 years in college, but you're at least looking at him and saying you have that ceiling. I don't think that's the case with Shedeur Sanders. And that's why I would compare the spot that Shedeur Sanders is in right now a little bit to where Bo Nix was last year. Shedeur doesn't have a top shelf NFL arm. He isn't a great athlete. He did some things in college and escaping where you have to ask the question, is he going to be able to get away from defensive players the same way he was at Colorado? There are a lot of questions about what sort of quarterback he's going to be in the pros and how he projects to the pros. Is he big enough? Does he have a big enough arm? Is he a good enough athlete? A lot of these questions were being asked of Bo Nix. And that's why this year, last year at this point, there were a lot of teams that didn't even look at Bo Nix as a first rounder. What did Bo Nix need to do to get in the first round? He had to find the right fit. And Denver looked at it, and Sean Payton doesn't care what everybody else thinks. Sean Payton doesn't give a crap what other teams' quarterback evaluations are. And Sean Payton had Bo Nix, and the Broncos had Bo Nix as the second quarterback in the entire draft class behind only Jaden Daniels. And they felt like he was perfect for what they wanted to do, and they were proven right. Shedeur Sanders right now is in that position. There are a lot of teams that do not view him as a first-round pick. And for him now, he's tough, he's smart, he's a lot of production in college. He's got to go find that fit now, the same way that Bo Nix found that fit in Denver. So I think that's where Shedeur is. Again, I'd say Cam Ward, gap, Shedeur. And the gap between Cam and Shedeur is probably bigger for a lot of people than the gap between Shedeur and Jackson Dart. And then you're talking about a grab bag at the position. But I do think Cam Ward has separated himself for most people as the top quarterback in this entire draft class. Okay, our third topic. Tee Higgins does get the tag. He's tagged for his second straight year. And just as I said with Sam Darnold, this applies to Tee Higgins as well. The tag could make it more complicated, not less complicated, to get a deal done with Tee Higgins. Tee Higgins' tag is worth over $26 million. It's 26.1 1.8, I think. 1.8. I think you can check that. I think it's $26.18 million. That's a lot on its own. But what does it mean for how he approaches this negotiation? Well, here's the thing, is that if they give him a second tag, it's either 144% of that number, which is over $37 million, or it's the quarterback tag number, which is already over $40 million. So to tag him in 2026 for the Bengals, it would cost them over $40 million. They're not going to do that. So basically for the Bengals right now, what you put in front of Tee Higgins has to be better than $26 million now and unrestricted free agency, unrestricted, unfettered free agency at 27 years old next year. And if you're Tee Higgins, you look at that and you say, if I think the market could get me to 30 to 35, whatever it is, maybe next year it's easier for him to get to 35. You're looking at that and you're saying, I can collect my 26 now. And yes, there's some injury risk. And then I can go get 35 million per year next year. And I've got the 26 in the bank and I've got 35 per going forward and I'm set for life. The Bengals have to beat that. And that's going to be tough to beat. And what does that mean with Jamar Chase out there? And Jamar Chase potentially asking for $40 million a year, because he did have a deal last year on the table at the end that was right around 36 million per. It would have made him the highest paid non-quarterback in football last year before the season started. So if he's at 40, where do you slot T? I think all those guys want to stay together. Joe wants to keep them together. The Bengals genuinely want to get a long-term deal done with both their receivers. Can you get it done? I think it's complicated. And I think the franchise tag complicates it a little bit on the front end, but maybe down the line, if the Bengals are truly willing to pay him what he would have been worth on the open market, maybe it does simplify it, where this is the number. And if you don't give it to me now, I'm going to get it next year. So we'll see what happens. Should be a fascinating situation with that, on what happens with just not just those two in Cincinnati, but also Trey Henderson. All right, appreciate you guys coming out. We'll do a mailbag edition later in the week. We've obviously got free agency, like I said, coming next week. We got you covered throughout the offseason. I know for a lot of people, the offseason is just as fun as the season. A lot of intrigue between now and next week. We'll have the owners' meetings after that and the draft after that. So we've got a lot to get to over the course of the next 2 months. Can't wait to cover it all for you guys. Again, we will see you a little later in the week with the mailbag.